Imagine a situation: you return home through a dark alley on an unlit road and three strangers pop out to meet you. You turn around and head back, but two more come out of the darkness. Well, to what extent will negotiations help you in this situation? The situation we will talk about in video is much more complicated and terrifying. Today we will talk about why the March negotiations between Kiev and Moscow failed and whether diplomacy is even capable of resolving a confrontation of this scale. Negotiations between Ukraine and Russia began on the fourth day of the Russian invasion, on February 28, but have not advanced an inch since then. So, to understand the outcome of negotiations, it is often enough to look at who's leading them. The Ukrainian side was presented by people who were in close circle of President Zelensky. Among them were David Arkamia, leader of the parliamentary faction Servant of the People, which is affiliated with the president, and Justice Minister Denis Maluska, advisor to the presidential office, Mikhailo Podolyak, Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov, and the Russian delegation was headed by former Minister of Culture and Chairman of the Russian Military Historical Society, Vladimir Medinsky. The names of other representatives of the Russian delegations were mentioned in the info almost for the first time, and they were not close to the president. So, to what extent could the people who represented the Russian Federation at the negotiations effectively participate in the search of the compromise, if they were so distant from the leader? Therefore, it is unlikely that they intended to conduct a constructive dialogue regarding the future of Ukraine. On the contrary, as the head of Ukrainian delegation, Podolyak states, he added that Russians seem to live in an alternative reality. Their proposal had an ultimatum character and were recited from a position of strength, which accordingly was not acceptable to the Ukrainian side. When parties began negotiations during the wartime, the first attempt to introduce negotiations turned out to be fruitless. During a war, it is possible to reach an agreement through negotiations only when both sides have exhausted their resources, and it will be not profitable for them to continue the war. It is at the front that the positions of the parties are determined. How strong they will be shown by the presence of the strategic successes. Serious defeats at the front often become catalysts for negotiations, or the negotiations can start after mutually hardened state. In the first case, an event must take place that seriously affects the moral perception of the war by one of the parties, and no propaganda will be able to silence the pain from it. In the case of Russia, such an event will be a defeat in this war, because the Russian authorities have left no room for retreat, not only by actions, but also by words. Are effective negotiations between Ukraine and the Russian Federation possible? During his address regarding the recognition of self-proclaimed republics of Donbass, the Russian president emphasized that Ukraine is an artificial state that accidentally gained independence, for which it should thank Russia, or as he says, Vladimir Lenin, who doesn't know this is the person who baptized Russia, founded Kiev, betrayed Kobzar, and proclaimed Ukrainian independence, standing on an armored car in 1918. Or it was another Volodymyr. Now, imagine, here the Russian army is collapsing. The higher you lift your nose, the more painful it will be to fall. A serious military defeat will hit the authority of authorities. It's one thing to lose a nuclear state with a population 3 times larger than yours. Well, it's quite another to lose it to a country that you didn't even consider a country. Invaded there, lost, and received sanctions. The negotiation positions of the countries are also a problem in the negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. Conditionally, for Ukraine, the maximum plan will be full territorial integrity, including Crimea, and security guarantees. For Russia, the maximum plan is the occupation of all Ukraine and transformation of its political system. These are not territorial claims. These are claims regarding the existence of the state and its identity. For Russia, the very existence of a democratic state in the post-Soviet space is a threat. At the same time, Ukraine's liberation of Crimea would deal a fatal blow to the Russian government, whose ideology was an aggressive war against its neighbors, for the sake of restoring so-called historical justice. A mutual stalemate can occur when the states exhaust their resources, and so far it is far from that. As a large country with a large-scale armed forces, the Russian Federation is used to putting pressure on its opponents, and often using diplomacy as one of the tools of an aggressive foreign policy. Yes, diplomacy cannot be only an alternative to war. This is an effective way of manipulation. In the case of Russian invasion, the Kremlin uses diplomacy on the informational front. Under the pretense of making efforts toward a peaceful resolution of the situation, he is trying to improve his image and divert attention from information about Russian atrocities on the battlefield. That is why negotiations with Moscow will make sense only if there is confidence in their constructiveness. Accordingly, negotiations will begin either after the defeat of one of the parties or due to stagnation in the fronts. Why will treaties with the Russian Federation not be effective? Pragmatism of Russian Federation in diplomacy prompts thought. Is there any point in entering into an agreement with a party that does not adhere to previous agreements? Well, it is logical. If we're talking about a war where the goal of Russian Federation is to destroy Ukraine as a state, then any peace will only be a temporary truce, a gain of time. And here is important to determine whose benefit it is. Let's imagine that the movement on the front stops. What's then? This will lead to serious consequences for Ukraine. The theme of the war will begin to fade in the informational space. Western support will weaken. Pro-Russian forces will begin to campaign for the return of Russia to the circle of the civilized world. In addition, repression in the occupied territories will intensify. Their integration in the Russian Federation will begin, including the assimilation of the local population. Moscow will improve logistics, and a new invasion will be a matter of time. So how will we guarantee the future of contract? The only way to make it effective is to prescribe such conditions, the violation of which would be disastrous for the violator. Thus, its non-fulfillment would not be pragmatically beneficial. That is why the Ukrainian side seeks to conclude an agreement on the security guarantees with a large number of geopolitical actors. Then Russia's aggression on the Ukrainian front will be a reputational failure for the guarantor countries. So what do we have in conclusion? Diplomacy is a tool of war. By the end of the summer of 2022, it does not resolve much and it's not constructive. A significant shift at the front can change the situation. If Ukraine manages to get a significant achievement, it will hit the Russian regime. Russia is trying to put pressure on the Ukraine, bringing to the temporary truth and end the existence of democracy. Accordingly, we can talk about the theoretical success of negotiations only when either one of the parties loses or if both parties exhaust their resources, and so that the cold peace does not turn into a hot war again. Ukraine must receive substantial, unquestionable security guarantees with clearly prescribed actions in case of their violation.